lawyer read it out in a flat, careful voice, the way they do, and what he read was this. My mother had left my older sister the house, the savings, the car, the contents of every account she owned, and she had left me $1, one single dollar, named in the will, on purpose, so that no one could ever say I had been forgotten. Only refused. I want you to sit in that room with me for a second, because I did not sit in it long. I stood up. I am not a stander-upper, not a scene-maker. I am a woman who keeps her head down. But I stood up in that quiet office, and I looked at my sister Lynn, sitting there with her hands folded and her eyes down, not even surprised. And I said something I will not repeat to you, and I walked out. I walked out of my own mother's will, hating both of them. The mother who had ranked me at $1, and the sister who had, my whole life, been the one she ranked first. My name is Dana. I am 45 years old, and I clean a hospital at night in Duluth, Minnesota. The floors, the rooms after they are emptied, the long, shining hallways at 3 in the morning when the place belongs to the janitors and the dying. It is honest work, and I am not ashamed of it, though I will tell you that standing in that lawyer's office in my good clothes, the $1 ringing in my ears, I felt every inch of the distance between my life and my sister's. Because that was the story. That was the story I had carried since I was a girl, and the will, it seemed to me, had just stamped it official. I should tell you a little about the life I built, because it matters to how I read that dollar. I left our hometown at 19 and did not look back hard. I told myself it was for work, for a fresh start, and that was half true. The other half was that the house I grew up in had always felt like a room I had not been invited into, and a person can only stand at the edge of her own family for so long before she decides to go and find an edge of her own somewhere else. So I went north. I took the night shifts because nobody else wanted them, and because the quiet suited me. There is a peace in an empty hospital at 3 in the morning that I have never found in a full room. I married once, briefly. It did not take. I have no children. I have a small apartment, a clean truck, a route to work, and for a long time, I told myself that this was a life I had chosen, and not a life I had retreated into. The dollar, when the lawyer read it out, felt like proof that the retreat had been the right call all along. See, I thought, sitting there. I was never really one of them anyway. They just finally put it in writing. The story was that our mother loved Lynn best. Lynn is 4 years older than me, and for as far back as I can remember, she was the one. She was the one Mom called every evening. She was the one Mom trusted, confided in, leaned on. When there was money trouble in the family, and there was, often, we were not a comfortable family. It was Lynn and Mom who handled it, behind closed doors, in low voices that stopped when I came into the room. I grew up on the outside of that closed door, certain that on the other side of it was a closeness I had been left out of, a love I had somehow failed to earn. I moved away young. I built my own small life. And the further I got, the more the story hardened. There was the favored daughter, who stayed close and got everything, and there was me, who was never quite let in. I can give you the exact memory the whole story grew out of. I was maybe 12. There had been one of the bad money nights. I knew the signs by then, the tight voices, the kitchen light left on too late. And I came downstairs for water and found Mom and Lynn at the table with papers spread out between them. And the moment they saw me, they went quiet and turned the papers face down. Lynn was 16. Mom said, "Go back to bed, honey. This isn't anything for you." And I went back up the stairs, and I lay in the dark, and I built, brick by brick, the conclusion that would go on to run my whole life. That there was a circle in this family, and that it had exactly 2 people standing inside it, and that I was not one of them and never would be. I never once, in 33 years, considered the other reading of that memory. I never considered that turning the papers face down might not have been shutting me out of a closeness. It might have been shutting me out of a horror. It might have been my mother and my teenage sister already, that early, deciding which of the 2 children was going to be protected from the thing that was coming. So, when the will said house, savings, car, all of it to Lynn, and $1 to me, it did not feel like a shock. It felt like a confession. It felt like my mother, from beyond the grave, finally saying out loud the thing I had felt my whole life. You were the one I loved less. I made it almost to my car before the lawyer caught me in the corridor. He was an older man, and he had not, I realized later, read my reaction as outrage. He had read it as the exact wound it was. He said my name, and he asked me to wait. And when I turned around, he was holding an envelope. He said that my mother had left it with him, with instructions, that it was for me, and only for me, and that I was to be given it after the will was read. But only, he said, if I reacted the way she had apparently told him I might. She predicted you'd walk out, he said gently. She wrote down what you'd probably say. She was usually right about you, your mother, even when you didn't think she was paying attention. That sentence stopped me where I stood. She predicted you'd walk out. She wrote down what you'd probably say. I had spent my whole life certain that my mother barely saw me, that her attention was a lamp pointed entirely at Lynn, and that I lived in the shadow just outside its circle. And here was a lawyer telling me that my mother had known me well enough to predict, almost to the gesture, exactly how I would behave in a room I had not yet walked into, on a day she would not live to see. You do not predict a stranger. You do not write down the likely words of a daughter you barely thought about. For the first time, standing in that corridor with the envelope in my hand, a small crack opened in the story I had carried for 30 years. And through the crack came an idea I had never once let myself have. What if she had been watching me the whole time, only from somewhere I could not see her watching from? I took the envelope out to my car. I sat in the cold with the engine off, and I almost did not open it, because I was so full of being right, being righteous, being the wronged one, the role I had rehearsed for 30 years. And a letter threatened all of that. But I opened it, and the first line, in my mother's hand, was this: Dana, if you are reading this in the parking lot, come back inside when you've finished, because Lynn is going to need you, and you're about to understand why. Here is what the letter told me. For the last 11 years of her life, my mother had been sick. Not the kind of sick you mention on the phone. The slow, expensive, grinding kind. The kind that eats a person and a family by inches over a decade. She had hidden it from me. On purpose. Every time I called and asked how she was, she said fine. And every time I offered to come, she found a reason it was not necessary, and I, busy, far away, and if I am honest, a little glad of the distance, had let myself believe her. For 11 years my mother had been dying slowly, and I had not known, because she had made very sure I would not. And the one who had carried it was Lynn. The closed doors of my childhood, the low voices, the money trouble handled in private, that had never been the inner circle of a favored daughter. That had been the war room. Lynn had spent the last decade of our mother's life as her nurse, her driver, her bookkeeper, her advocate, her everything. Lynn had emptied her own savings into the medical bills. Lynn had, at one point, the letter told me, taken a second mortgage on her own house to cover a treatment, a thing I never knew, a thing that nearly cost Lynn her home. The evening calls I had envied my whole life were not cozy chats. They were check-ins. Is she breathing all right? Did she take the pills? Can you come? I'm scared. While I was building my own small, clean life a state away, my sister was being slowly ground down to nothing in a house full of medicine and fear, and she had never once called me to complain about it, and neither, ever, had our mother. The letter laid out the years for me, plainly, the way my mother laid out everything. The first surgery, when I was 34, and thought she had simply taken a quiet winter. The treatments that worked, and then the ones that did not. The year she could no longer drive, and Lynn began taking her to every appointment, an hour each way, sometimes twice a week, around her own job until she lost the job. The months Mom needed someone in the house overnight, and it was Lynn who slept on the couch, for years, in a marriage of her own that did not survive it. Lynn's husband left somewhere in the middle of all this, and I had been told, on the phone that they had simply grown apart. And I had believed that too, because believing the easy version of my sister's life was a habit I had been practicing since I was 12. Every smooth, simple story I had been handed about that family across 11 years, I now understood, had been a clean cloth laid carefully over something terrible by two women who had decided, together, that I would not have to see what was underneath it. The house, the savings, the car, the whole estate, every dollar of it, that I had stood up and raged about. My mother explained it in the plainest words she had. It was not a reward. It was a repayment. Lynn had spent her own house, her own savings, her own decade keeping our mother alive, and what looked, in that lawyer's office, like a mother lavishing everything on a favorite was, in truth, a dying woman trying to pay back, with the only thing she had left, a debt to the daughter who had given up everything for her. The estate was not a prize Lynn won. It was, more or less, the money Lynn had already spent coming home. And the $1. My mother explained that too. She wrote that she had thought hard about leaving me nothing, and had decided against it, because nothing could be mistaken for an oversight, for a forgetting, and she did not want me to spend the rest of my life wondering if she had simply failed to think of me. So she left me $1, named and deliberate, and in the letter she told me what it meant. It meant, I did not forget you. I want to be honest about why this is the way it is. There was nothing left to give you, Dana. Your sister had already been given everything, because your sister had already given everything. The dollar is not what I think you are worth. The dollar is what was left, after the bill your sister paid for all of us. I have to tell you how that landed, because it did not land as comfort. It landed, first, as a worse pain than the dollar itself had been. For 1 hour I had been able to be simply angry, clean, righteous, wronged. And anger, I have learned, is a kind of shelter. You can live inside it and stay dry. The letter took the roof off, because the truth was so much harder to hold than the lie had been. The lie was, my mother loved me less. That is a sad thing, but it is a simple thing, and it lets you be the victim. And there is a terrible comfort in being the victim. The truth was, my mother loved me enough to spend my sister in order to protect me. And I had repaid that protection by standing up in a lawyer's office and cursing the both of them. There is no comfort anywhere in that. There is only the cold of a parked car and a dollar's worth of inheritance, and the slow understanding that the person I had spent 30 years feeling sorry for was the one who had been carried, and not the one who had done the carrying. I sat in that cold car, and I read the last part of the letter, perhaps 10 times. My mother wrote that she was sorry she had kept her illness from me, that it had been a choice she made out of a complicated kind of love, a wish to protect the one child whose life was finally clear of the family's troubles, and that she knew, even as she made it, that the protection would cost me. It would cost me 11 years of being kept outside the truth. It would cost me the chance to help, and it would cost me, she knew, exactly the explosion that had just happened in the lawyer's office. The fury of a woman who had been protected from a burden, and then resented the people who looked, from the outside, like they had been chosen over her. She closed the letter like this. She wrote, I am asking you to do one thing for me, since I cannot ask it in person. Do not let what you felt in that room become the last thing between you and your sister. Lynn did not take anything from you. Lynn carried what you were spared. Go back inside. I went back inside. Lynn was still in the lawyer's office, sitting where I had left her, in the same still way she had taken the entire reading. Not triumphant, not anything, just exhausted. The bone exhaustion, I now understood, had a decade behind it. She looked up when I came back in, and she braced herself, the way you brace for a blow you have decided you deserve. And I realized in that moment that my sister had been braced for my anger, not just today, but for years. That she had known exactly how this would look to me, and had said nothing, had defended nothing, had let me believe she was the favorite right up to the end, because explaining it would have meant telling me the truth about Mom's illness, and Mom had asked her not to. She had carried all of it, and she had carried my resentment on top of it, in silence, for years, because the only way to set my resentment down would have been to break a promise to our dying mother. I did not say anything clever. I'm not a clever woman. I crossed that office and I put my arms around my sister, and I said the only true thing I had, which was, I'm sorry and I didn't know, and you should never have had to do that alone. And Lynn, who had not cried once through the whole reading, who had I think not let herself cry in a very long time, finally did. We have talked more in these last months than we did in the previous 20 years. I have learned the things I was protected from knowing. The nights, the bills, the fear, the slow goodbye I was not there for. It is hard to hear. There is a grief in it that is sharper, in its way, than ordinary grief, because it is grief for a death I was kept away from, mixed with shame at how relieved I once was to be far from the trouble. But I would rather have the hard, true version than the clean, false one I lived in for 30 years. There is a thing Lynn said to me, one of those nights, that I carry now the way I once carried the dollar. I had asked her, because I had to ask it, it had been eating me alive, why she never called. Why, in 11 years of being ground down to nothing, she had never once picked up the phone and said, Dana, I cannot do this alone. Come home. And Lynn looked at me for a long while, and then she said, because Mom asked me not to, and because, honestly, after a few years, I stopped believing that you would come. That last part is the one that stays with me. She stopped believing I would come. I had been so far gone, so far behind my own wall, that my own sister, drowning, had quietly done the math on whether her sister would help her drown a little less, and had concluded, reasonably, that I would not. I cannot prove she was wrong. That is the hardest sentence in this whole story, and I am not going to soften it. I genuinely do not know, if she had called me at 38, whether I would have come. I would like to think so, but I had built my entire life on being the one who got away. And you do not, in my experience, easily turn around and walk back toward a fire you spent your whole life running from. I told Lynn to keep all of it, the house, the savings, every dollar of the estate. And I meant it, and she has, because it was never anything but her own spent life coming back to her. The $1 I kept too. I had it framed, which Lynn thinks is morbid, and I think is the opposite. It hangs in my hallway. It is not, to me, the symbol of being loved less, the way I read it for one terrible hour in a lawyer's office. It is the symbol of having been protected, at a cost I never agreed to, and can never repay, by a mother who could not give me money because she had already given my sister the chance to spend it saving her. The dollar is the cheapest thing in my house, and the most expensive lesson in it. If you have a sibling you have spent your life resenting, the favored one, the one who got the closeness, the one who got the estate, and you are certain you know the shape of the family ledger, then this story was for you. One word in the comments, if it found you. Owed. Just that. It tells me you are willing to consider that the person you envied may not have been collecting a reward at all, that they may, the whole time, have been quietly paying a debt the rest of you never saw. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. The first, when a family's love or a family's money looks unequal to you, be very slow to read the inequality as a verdict on your worth. What looks from the outside like favoritism is so often something else entirely, a repayment, a burden, a debt being settled in private. I spent 30 years certain my mother loved my sister more, and the closeness I envied turned out to be the weight I was spared. Before you let an unequal share break your heart, find out what the larger share was actually purchased with. It is, more often than you would believe, purchased with a price you would never have wanted to pay. The second, if you are the one who was protected, kept outside the family's hardest season, by people who loved you and decided you should not have to carry it, try to receive that for the strange gift it was, instead of the insult it can look like. Being spared a burden does not make you less loved. It often means you were loved enough that someone chose to stand between you and the worst of it. The only wrong response to having been carried is to resent the ones who carried you. The right response is to find them, while you still can, and help carry whatever comes next. Count what someone carried before you ever count what they were given. I'll see you next time.